Hi, Anders. Thank you so much for coming to this Existential Offerings interview. I have had the great pleasure of meeting you during my doctoral training, but one of the beauties of this interview is the fact that hopefully your inspiration and your wisdoms and your understandings will be able to be shared with a wider audience. For those who haven't had the chance to meet you during training, how would you introduce yourself?
So my name is Anders and I live in Copenhagen. I'm a Danish philosopher who also works as a therapist. And importantly for me, being a therapist is part of being a philosopher and not the other way around. Um, so I consider my main calling in life to be a philosopher in the original sense of the word. And that's why I'm also doing therapy, because I consider therapy to be a way of practicing philosophy or doing philosophy, not just applying philosophy, but actually doing philosophy.
Mm. When you say in the original meaning of the word philosopher, how would you describe that?
So the meaning, the word philosophy comes from the Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who traveled from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia and to India. And when he was on this traveling, he began to call himself a philosopher, a lover of wisdom or a searcher of wisdom. And this means that originally philosophy is a humble devotion to wisdom, to insight. That is a way of living according to insight and searching for insight. When you live in a devotion to wisdom, you will be able to transform your life and reach a higher state of existence. And this is also what I'm trying to do in therapy, help people to uh, gain insight into themselves, not just insight as something that concerns knowledge, but something that is very practical. And I think this way of understanding philosophy was original in Greece, India, China, and Africa until a few hundred years ago. So then, Western philosophy somehow, in my perspective, began to degenerate. It began to become purely theory. And I think philosophy in the modern Western world has lost something. It has lost the practical ambition to live according to wisdom. It has become pure theory. And I think that's why so many people think that philosophy becomes abstract and detached from what we are doing. Originally, philosophy was also practiced as a kind of therapy in order to gain a better life, release oneself from suffering. Whereas I think some modern philosophy is a way of getting problems instead of getting rid of them. And I think something has been lost there. So I've been very interested in the way you can practice philosophy as a way of life, not just Western philosophy, but also Indian, Chinese, African philosophy, and so on. And we have lost this attachment to or this search for wisdom in our times. We have become so occupied with knowledge and technology, also within philosophy, that we have lost the ability to see what is beyond the surface, what is beyond the surface of everyday life. And I think this means that a lot of people feel lost, disoriented. And the only way of getting rid of this fundamental feeling of being lost and disoriented is to search for the roots and search for what is behind. Um, and I think we need to reinvent this search, the original sense of philosophy. But I'm not only interested in philosophy in the most traditional sense of the word, because I also work with spiritual practices, practices from religion. I work with shamanism and other things, and try to integrate these insights into philosophy as a search for wisdom, because wisdom should not just be theories, but wisdom is all the embodied insights that have been practiced in human history for at least 50,000 years.
And what introduced you, or what brought you towards existential philosophy specifically then?
So I have a master's degree in philosophy and the history of ideas. So I have been trained in a very theoretical approach to philosophy originally. And when I finished my master's degrees, I reached the conclusion that this was completely useless. And I could not use this for anything. So I wanted to do something else with my life. So I began working as a counselor, and I began studying psychology and more conventional psychotherapy. But I felt that something was missing. I think psychology, in my perspective, has too narrow a perspective of human beings. Psychology is psychologizing everything. And this means that psychology is not able to get the whole picture, I think. So I had the chance of beginning a doctorate at the NSPC in London, which was a way for me to go back to philosophy, but now in a more practical sense. And I had the chance of working there, studying there and working afterwards with applying philosophy in practice. But along the way, I got more and more interested in widening the scope, because traditional existential therapy tends to be also a bit narrowly focused on modern Western existentialism. And I think that's a shame, because the history of philosophy and religion contains such rich wisdom that is lost if we become too dogmatic and too narrowly focused on a very limited range of modern European philosophers.
Yeah, I have to say I'm completely in agreement with you there. And these thoughts are exactly what has kind of generated me to start this project in itself. For those who are less familiar with the concept of existential philosophy, how would you define it?
So I think the problem with defining is that the concept of existence has been lost somehow to existential philosophy. And I think what is often overlooked is the concept of existence itself. I have met many existential therapists who are not aware of the actual meaning of the word existence. And perhaps this is because it's almost being forgotten in the history of existential philosophy. But I think that the most original and the first existential philosophers had a very clear understanding of this idea, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. And existence means stepping forth or standing forth, stepping into the light. And this is actually a very ancient spiritual idea that goes back to the beginning of civilization and even before that. So existential therapy is about helping people to stand forth and step into the light. And this means that we tend to live in the shadow, or we tend to live in darkness. We tend to live in hiding from ourselves. And therapy is accompanying people to become more clear to themselves, to step forth. So this is my interest in existential philosophy. But I think this idea of standing forth, of stepping into the light, has been lost to a lot of existential philosophy, especially within the tradition of existential phenomenology. From Heidegger and onwards, these philosophers tended to shift the focus away from the concept of existence to the concept of being. And this tends to become a very abstract discussion. And the original sense of doing something practical with your life, of transforming yourself, is somehow lost in this approach. And instead, focus is shifted to being and the life world. And in my opinion, these philosophers become far too detached from actual living. And it becomes too theoretical, too absorbed in abstract notions and concepts. And I think this is a shame, because the concept of existence and existential philosophy, that is the philosophy of existence, has a potential that is deep, but that is lost if we just get caught up in trying to clarify the client's life world or the client's being.
How would you say that it can help with people's well-being in general?
Because we are caught up in ourselves, we are caught up in our own shadows, we are caught up in ourselves, we are caught up in our own fears, our own protective mechanisms that make us stay in the shadow. Most of us build ourselves around a protection towards fear and anxiety. And we don't see this. And we need to get rid of this. And this is a very ancient insight that you can find in most religions and ancient philosophies. Existential philosophy is just one way of, or existential therapy is just one way of doing this. We have to get rid of this in order to breathe freely. And breathing freely in Latin is spiritar. So this is the original meaning of spirituality, getting rid of all our protective mechanisms, all our blockings, and so that we can breathe freely. So I work a lot with breathing in therapy, also actual breathing, because this way you can see how the client is doing. Existence is something, the moment you exist, you can feel it in your breathing, because you will be able to circulate completely freely, which you cannot do if you live in the shadow, or if you live stuck in your own protective mechanisms, in your own suppressed emotions, or what it is. So existence is not an intellectual concept in that way. It's not just something about thinking. It's something very physical and very spiritual. And this is what I think is getting lost sometimes. If we get too intellectual around philosophy as something theoretical that needs to be applied to practice, because it needs to be something very real, something that you can actually feel, that is present in the room, and that is also beyond words.
Have there been particular moments in life where these ideas have really helped you?
Yes, they have. In my personal life, I have, when I was about to finish my courses at NSPC, I began to study ancient Roman, Greek philosophy, ancient Indian, Chinese philosophy, and I began to engage in different kinds of spiritual practice, which I have done for the last 11 years. And I have also been training shamanism and other things. And this, in the beginning, this helped me through what I could describe as a spiritual awakening, which is, contrary to what people think, a very painful and confusing experience. And a couple of years ago, I began to re-enter this process once again. And I think you can, awakening is kind of a layered process. So you can enter into more and more awakenings until you reach more and more clarity. And during this process, it has become more and more clear to me that life is about being able to breathe freely. And you can find this in some of the existential philosophers as well. Nietzsche says it, Kierkegaard says it, but it disappears from existential philosophy after that. So we need to be able to breathe freely in our life. And we are not able to do that, not only as individuals, but also as humankind at the moment. So we are distorting the Earth's possibility of breathing at the moment. Climate changes, environmental damages means that the Earth we are living on can no longer breathe. We have come in conflict with our natural surroundings. At the moment, we are experiencing an epidemic where we are wearing masks so that we can no longer breathe. So we are suffocating on many different levels at the moment. And we are so eager in our materialistic worlds to get more and more welfare, to perform more and more, and we do not see that we are suffocating. People are suffering from stress, and stress is an expression that I can no longer breathe. But we do not see this. We do not see what is most obvious, that our breathing in and out is our most deeply connection to the world. And that is the way that everything is connected. And you can find it in all ancient religions. If you look in the Bible, it starts with a lesson on breathing. So God breathes air into the world and into human beings, which makes them able to breathe. So breathing is the most fundamental aspect of being, and it means in Danish, the word breathing and spirit is the same. So if we are not able to breathe, we are not able to live as spiritual beings. Our spirit is closed. Our mind is closed. So we need to understand what is blocking my breathing, what is hindering me from being able to breathe freely. And these might be all the things that I'm doing to make myself safe and healthy and protected in this world. I think these are what are good for me. This is what a good life contains, my titles, all my material belongings, but I do not see that it makes me suffocate.
And for therapists who might see this and who would be interested in exploring what this concept more, perhaps from the outset or an introductory way, what would you suggest for them?
I think looking inwards is the most important thing in order to learn, to gain wisdom. We think that wisdom is about reading books like we have learned at the university, that if we just read more books or we just attend more lectures, then we will become more and more clever, and then we will become more and more able to understand the world. But that's not true, because we can have 10 master's degrees and doctorate degrees from university without being able to understand who we actually are and what we contain inside. So we need to be able to get self-insight, and self-insight is the fundament of wisdom. So who am I actually? What do I contain? Why do I act like this? Look at myself. And I think this is one of the most important practices in most religions and ancient philosophies as well. But we tend to forget this. And there tend to be something that we do not want to look at. And I think therefore also, apart from existential therapy, I have also become interested in Jung's depth psychology, because we need to have these ways of looking into ourselves. What are we hiding from ourselves? Many ancient religions had these practices, like Christianity. It is often overlooked that Christianity contains some very profound therapeutic practices from very early on. One of them was the confessional practice. And the confessional practice is based on my ability to look at myself, to face myself and tell it to someone else, which means that what I see in myself is no longer a secret. Because as long as I keep secrets to myself and other people, they are actually disturbing me and they are suffocating me. So the most important thing to me to do is to look into myself honestly. And when I look into myself, in my experience of working with therapists, sooner or later you will reach a closed door. And when you open this closed door with the clients, it will be completely dark and empty, and they do not know what is there because they have been hiding this all their life, and they are not aware of it. It's not just that it has been suppressed, they actually do not know what is in there. So, but you need to take them there. If they have the courage to do that, because then something is in there. And that is existence. That is looking inwards so that you can step out of your shadows, of your inner darkness. But you need to go through it, not hide it or avoid it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's so wonderfully put. And I'm wondering, for those who haven't got a training in existential or any kind of therapeutic training, are there other sources as well? Because I know you've mentioned like how it is moving away also from this understanding that wisdom comes from textbooks. You're saying wisdom comes from within. Are there any other sources of inspiration? I don't, are there poetry? Is there art? Is there music? Is there anything else that has really inspired you?
I think what has mostly inspired me in recent years is especially the history of religion and philosophy and spiritual practice. And especially ancient practices. We tend to think that we are far more clever today than people were before because we have aeroplanes and we have computers. But when it comes to life, I think people have had more rich and deep insights previously than we have. So you can approach all sorts of practices: Buddhism, meditation, Hinduism, early Christianity, Islam. I have also worked with shamanism, and today a lot of people are working with psychedelic substances, which I also think is a good way of approaching yourself if you are not able to see in yourself. As long as you don't have a too fragmented experience of yourself, because then psychedelics will not do any good. But I think what is most important is to begin searching, looking. And that is the original meaning of philosophy: searching for insight, searching for the answer, questioning. Instead of thinking, now I have reached this book, now I have all the answers, because then you're no longer searching and you tend to become dogmatic. And you need to keep on searching no matter what you are studying. Also, existential therapy. Do not just read these books on existential philosophy and therapy and think, now I have all the answers, because then you are no longer existential.
What would you say then, with all of these different influences, what is your existential offering, as it were? What is your...
What is my existential offering? Well, I think the fundamental idea of existence, look into that concept. What does it mean? Standing forth, stepping into the light. It's a very, very ancient and deep insight that is being lost in the history of existential philosophy, and that is being lost within modern existential therapy. Look into this concept. This does not only have something to do with existential philosophy. This is a very deep concept. And it's a very rich and valuable concept that we need to look into as existential practitioners and as human beings.
Thank you so much, Anders. It's such it's always an inspiring experience, because I suppose one of the things which I know that myself and my colleagues have always valued about being in your presence and in your trainings and in your classes is that you don't just inspire us to look inside, but you somehow give us the courage to start to do so. How would you say, where does this courage come from for people who are listening to this perhaps and thinking I'd like to look inside but I'm scared?
Yes, but you need to meet your anxiety, and this is what is most important. As long as we think that life is mostly about being secure and safe, we will not get anywhere. And at the moment, we are living in a society, in Western societies, where the value of security and safety is becoming, in my opinion, too overwhelming. We are closing down everything. We want to control everything. We want to control life. We want to control that because we are so afraid. But the more we tend to control everything, the more security we search for, the more afraid we get, and the more lifeless we get in the end. So we need to let go of all this fear. And I think I tend to use the concept of anxiety and fear together, even though I know that existential therapists tend to talk about anxiety. But I think that fear is our most fundamental feeling as human beings. We come into this world screaming, and we tend to be afraid from then on. And we build our ego around this fear, and we need to let go of this. This is what is most important, because we cannot breathe, we cannot live unless we let go of this. So as you can see in Western societies at the moment, we are controlling, because we want to get rid of this epidemic, but we can't breathe.
Thank you so much, Anders. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. I'm wondering, is there anything that you feel compelled to add as we conclude this interview? Any last messages?
No, I think I've said what I wanted to say.
Well, I hugely appreciate you sharing your time, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Anders.
Okay.